Hello everyone, my lecture shall focus on the principles of communication. According to Gamble and Gamble in 2010, these are the following core communication principles. First, communication is dynamic. When we say dynamic, it is an ongoing process. It is never ending. The next one is communication is unrepeatable and irreversible. That is why before you open your mouth to speak, you have to really think if you really want to utter the words that you're about to say. It is because once something damaging or offensive has been said, it's going to be hard for you to take it back, especially when the damage has been done on the part of the receiver or receivers of the message. Communication is also culturally linked. There are some verbal and nonverbal communication which are exclusively present in certain cultures. Like, for example, in the Filipino culture, we make use of the expressions po and opo or ho and oho as a sign of respect to the person we're talking to. We also have nonverbal gestures such as the pagmamano and also the magalang bow, which is something unique in our culture. The next one is communication is influenced by ethics. So we will be discussing this in a more in-depth manner once we reach the latter part of this presentation. The next one is communication is competence-based. More or less, a person's ability to speak a language fluently is one of the measures of his or her communicative competence. That's why it is important for you to be able to train yourselves as early as now to speak the English language fluently because it is a reflection of your competence per se. The next one is communication is being transformed by media and technology. This is very evident now, especially so that in this digital age, communication has been made easier for us. Even if the person we're talking to is very far away from us, we would be able to communicate to them in an instant at a click of our fingers. The next one is communication is a process. And like what I have mentioned in the previous slide, it is a dynamic process. It is an ongoing process that is made possible by the presence of feedback in the communication process. The next one is communication is contextual. This is where setting would come in. Okay, so is it a particular social context uh, or is it a particular physical context? Okay, so these are essential in determining how communication should be treated in specific instances. The next one is communication is continuous. Like what we have mentioned, it is an ongoing process. The next one is communication is symbolic. So we make use of a set of symbols, which is what we call as language. It also covers the use of both verbal and nonverbal communication. It is also evident in the field of semiotics or the study of signs and symbols. The next one is communication is culturally linked. Okay, so in as much as communication has cultural background, which would be subjective from one speaker to another, it is also linked. So the understanding on the part of the audience would depend on their cultural background. The next one is communication is collaborative. We need other people in order to successfully communicate our message. And then, of course, communication is ethical. When we say ethical, we refer to the fact that we are guided by a set of principles when we communicate, especially when we practice intercultural communication. So let's take a look into the principles of effective communication. For oral communication or spoken communication, these are the principles that we need to be guided with. The first one is we have to be clear with our purpose, our goal. If we would ask a question, then it should be crystal clear so that the answer of the receiver would be what we expect them to generate. Number two, be complete with the message you deliver. As much as possible, you make sure that whatever you say are supported by facts and or essential information. Okay? Sarcasm is not that much encouraged because things or statements may be taken literally by your receivers. Take note, you don't have exactly the same comprehension level or linguistic background with that of your receivers. Number three, be concise. Okay, so we follow the formula, keep it short and simple. Take note, when we do oral communication, it's different from that of written communication wherein we make use of complete sentences. In oral communication, sometimes we may even just simply use simple phrases, but again, even if we use those, we have to be understandable on the part of our receiver. Okay? You don't need, it says here, to be verbose or wordy with your statements. And take note, brevity or being brief should be observed. Number four, be natural with your delivery. It would be very awkward on the part of the receiver if the delivery of the sender of his or her message is very artificial. So for oral communication, we make use of meaningful pauses. So if it's the end of our statement, then it would be a longer pause. We have to exude a certain degree of confidence also, even if we do not feel confident enough. This is particularly true during public speaking, okay? Because we somehow establish this rapport with our audience, and whatever attitude we project on stage, they would absorb it, okay? They would be influenced by it. Number five, be specific and timely with your feedback. So take note of the importance of feedback, whether it be oral or written communication. Inputs, feedback, suggestions, comments, they are most helpful, especially on the part of the speaker of the message, so that he or she can use that for improvement. Meanwhile, for written communication, we observe the 7 C's. Okay, the first one is clarity is very important. We would avoid misunderstandings if we observe clarity. As simple as that. Number two, be concise. Always stick to the point and do not beat or run around the bush. So be brief by focusing on your main point. If you can simply say something with lesser words, then better. Number three, be concrete. So support your claims with enough facts, like what we have mentioned in the previous slide. Everything should be fact-based. As much as possible, we do not contribute to gossips, okay, or to grapevines. Okay? Your readers will easily know if you are bluffing or deceiving them in the first place. And of course, in academic writing, facts are very important. You are using facts or information or research-based facts in order to support the credibility of your statements, of your study. Number four, be correct. Okay, so in as much as we would want to observe brevity, clarity, and conciseness, accuracy is also a must. So grammatical correctness is a factor there. Most of the time, it's a turn off on the part of the readers if what they read contain grammatical error. However, there should also be times wherein we should consider the background, the linguistic background of our writer. Okay? So perhaps, let's say, English is not the mother tongue of that particular writer, or it can also mean a lapse on the part of the editor of the script. Okay? So what could we do to avoid that? We always revise, we always edit, we always proofread our work so that we would avoid errors as much as possible. So minimal errors may be acceptable, but if we can manage to avoid that, then better. Number five, be coherent. So how do we observe coherence in written communication? We make use of logical transitions in our paragraphs in the flow of our ideas. Okay? So examples of this are therefore, furthermore, okay, moreover, also, okay? So we make use of those in a logical manner. The next one is be complete. So you have to include all the necessary support. You have to consider all the necessary references that you can use as support for your claims, especially for, let's say, legal matters or very serious matters. Okay? If there is incomplete details on the part of the writer, then the audience or the readers would most likely be left hanging. Number 7, be courteous. So courtesy is a must, whether it be oral or written communication. The tone should not be very authoritative. However, there are some exceptions for that, like for example, in legal writing. Okay? Um, the general rule is you avoid overtone or insinuation to eliminate confusion on the part of your reader so that you would not be misinterpreted, you would not be misunderstood. Let's move on now to communication ethics. So, what is communication ethics in the first place? Ethics is the discussion of the judgments we make about the appropriateness, the right or wrong of our actions and policies, be those actions communicative, political, social, personal, or a mixture of areas. Take note here that ethics encompasses almost every aspect of communication, regardless of the topic, regardless of the manner by which the message has been sent to the receivers. Okay? We have to strictly follow or be guided by communication ethics. So it will help us determine whether what we say or do is appropriate in certain situations, or is it proper considering its effects on the society, especially so that most of us belong to a multicultural society or community wherein our audience come from different walks of life. So, what are the things that we have to consider in communication then? There are situations in school or in the workplace when you have to decide on what to say, what not to say. Okay? Or even how to say it. Sometimes we even rehearse it in our minds, or sometimes we even rehearse it out loud. So, in order for us to avoid being misunderstood, we even ask questions. In other words, say what you mean and mean what you say. So it says here that we vary in terms of cultural background and personalities. Hence, there is a need to consider our behavior when we communicate with others. We have different accommodation techniques when we talk to someone with that of higher rank than us, or someone who is older than us, or even someone who is younger than us, right? To children, for instance, okay? To authorities. So we have to be observant of all these. Now, one thing that we have to take note of is also plagiarism. So we have to be aware of the basic rules on copyright and the legal issues on the use of information from various sources so that we would not be guilty of committing plagiarism. Okay? So it is actually considered a mortal sin on the part of the offender. So, what then are the suggestions for us to attain ethical communication? Okay, so the first one is ethical communicators are respectful of their audiences. Okay, I think this is very self explanatory. The next one is ethical communicators consider the consequences of their communication. Take note, going back to what we have discussed earlier, communication is unrepeatable. So we have to be careful of how we phrase our statements or questions so that it would not be offensive, it would not be disrespectful on the part of the listeners or audience. The next one is ethical communicators respect the truth. That's why we make use of facts as our basis for our statements. Ethical communicators use information properly. So we try to avoid plagiarism again. We have to avoid the use of fake news as our reference. Okay? We have to be more mindful with how we disseminate information. Next, ethical communicators do not falsify information, especially for researchers. For example, um, we could not just simply falsify information to attain our desired result of a particular study, for instance. For job applicants also, for police officers, okay, we don't encourage falsification of information, especially with public documents. Ethical communicators respect the rights of others to information. So, for example, if it's a public document, then everyone could have access, for instance. For journalists, they would know this by heart because that is one of the things that they practice in their profession. So remember, as we communicate, we need to take into account the ethical aspect of our interaction with others. Respecting others' rights and their views may result in negotiation, effective communication, and a good working relationship. We avoid conflicts with the use of ethical communication. Okay? Like, for example, if it's a case, we can settle it through amicable settlement. What are the ethical dilemmas in the workplace? Should I embellish my resume or curriculum vitae with half-truths in order to get a job? Okay, so you consider this later on when you graduate. Is it proper? Is it ethical for you to just simply fabricate information in your CV just to be hired? Okay, so ethics would come in there. Next, should I lie with statistics when using graphs or charts in documents or presentations to make my arguments more persuasive? Okay, so researchers, when you reach your thesis writing, please remember what I told you now. Next, should I pass on and perhaps embellish rumors on the organizational grapevine? Okay, so for some companies, this is punishable administratively. Next, should I plagiarize materials to pad out documents I am writing? Okay, so for students, this is a warning. Okay, should we use communication to unite or should we use communication to divide? Next, should I censor, filter, or block information getting to others? Okay, especially for evidence concerning cases. Should I censor myself or remain silent when the group I am in is making important decisions? Okay, so this is referring to your right to communicate, to right to express your ideas, and the right to hear others' ideas as well. Should I create spin or deceptive impressions when communicating with the public, especially to those of you who are aspiring politicians or leaders in the future? Should I use knowledge about human behavior to more effectively manipulate others? Okay, so that is very much true. Should I deliberately distort the situation analyzed in a report I am writing in order to create further work opportunities for myself? For example, this is particularly true for investigations, okay, for news reportage. Okay. Should I use knowledge about leadership styles to manipulate others? So this has something to do with the first bullet in this slide. Next, should I manipulate meetings so that a hidden agenda rather than the written agenda is followed? So remember, ethics in communication emphasizes that morals influence the behavior of a person or a group of persons affecting their communication. So it's important to note that one's behavior should be regulated or should be guided by the following: honesty, decency, truthfulness, sincerity, and moral uprightness. So, an effective and ethical communicator should be credible and he or she should have integrity. So, how do we achieve ethical communication? The first one, we establish an effective value system that will pave the way for the development of your integrity as a person. So, that's just what I said earlier. Number two, provide complete and accurate information. When filling out forms, for instance, you have to put their accurate information to avoid falsification of documents. The third one is disclose vital information adequately and appropriately, especially for investigations, right? This is very important. Never hide information or never conceal or never alter. So that's all for our lecture on the principles of communication. Thank you very much.